Alright guys, it's Dominic here for Kit Guru, and your eyes do not deceive you. This is indeed a aftermarket Vega 64 card. It's the Nitro Plus from Sapphire, and where to start really? It's taken months, it's been a long time coming. I honestly didn't know if we were actually going to see any, but we do have one. We have this Vega 64 from Sapphire, aftermarket cooler and all, and let's dive straight in. I should start this review by saying we don't yet have firm pricing or firm availability. Obviously, this I'm filming in advance, so this is scheduled to launch Friday 2 PM. So we have been told by Sapphire to expect stock for then, but obviously we're going to have to see. So I just wanted to preface my review of that we're not yet certain of pricing and availability, but we'll find out as soon as we can. Obviously, you can check our written review over on kitguru.net. Right, let's dive straight in with the design. And it's obviously an absolute monster. It measures I think it's about 32 centimeters long, so definitely make sure this is going to fit in your case. It's also about 11 centimeters tall and over 5 centimeters thick. So it is an absolute monster of a card. You can also see the triple fan cooling solution. The outer two fans are actually 100mm, and the inner one, the central fan, is 90mm. So I guess that's done just to maximise the actual amount of fans you can get in this chassis. And they both use Sapphire's, or all three actually, use Sapphire's quick disconnect technology, which I can show you now. It's very simple. You unscrew one single screw, holds each fan in place, pull it out, and the fan is removed. So I'm not sure if they're still doing it with the Vega 64 cards, but with their RX 580, 480, so on, their aftermarket Nitro cards, you could actually swap the fans out for LED models if you wanted to. Now, these plastic bits here on the front of the shroud are actually LEDs. These are meant to be RGB LEDs, but because we haven't yet got the working software for the Vega 64 card, at the minute they were just showing blue for me. So, you know, I guess just you have to wait for the software to actually get your full RGB functionality, but it's nice to know it's going to be coming. Another major feature of the design is actually the 3 8-pin power connectors. I can't remember the last time I saw 3 8-pins on a single graphics card. I think it might have been the R9 295, which was actually the dual GPU one. So to have 3 is quite, I don't know if impressive is the word, but it's certainly something. For the original Vega 64 air-cooled card, the reference card, that actually had a recommended power supply. Sapphire recommended up a 750 watt power supply if you wanted to use that card. So I'm not sure what they'd be recommending for this one, but our testing actually showed it drew just shy of 400, the whole system drew just shy of 450 watts under full load, which actually isn't that much. It's more than a lot of NVIDIA graphics cards we've seen, far more than the 1080, 1070 Ti, what have you. But you could probably get away with a 600 watt power supply, is what I'm saying. You could obviously get away with 500, but then you're pushing it really close and you don't want to be maxing out your power supply for its whole lifespan. But obviously that's another topic for another day. Moving around to the I/O, we have 2 display ports, 1.4 and 2 HDMI. That's obviously done with VR in mind. If you recall reference, Vega 64 had the 3 display ports, 1 HDMI. Sapphire's changed that. There's no DVI port either, which I am frankly not fussed about whatsoever. It just means there's more ventilation on the actual I/O bracket. If you're familiar with our graphics card reviews, this is usually the part where we take the card apart. We take the heatsink off, we look at the PCB, the heat pipes, VRMs, etc, etc. But Sapphire's asked us not to do that with this card, not because they've done anything secret, it's just because they've actually used a special thermal paste which they have baked on, apparently. So if we took the heatsink off, we're obviously tampering with that, and then it affects, the next person to get this card obviously isn't going to have it in the same state it would come if you'd bought one straight out of the box. So that's the only reason we're going to be skipping taking the card apart. Now, turning the card round to the back, we can see this lovely monochrome backplate. I'd say it's 3-tone. You've got some grey, some slightly off-white, and then the main black body. This bit here is obviously more RGB LED, but It's actually very inoffensive, very colour neutral, so I think it looks really good. It's not going to clash with any colour coordinated systems. So unlike the Zotac card I saw recently, which had the huge garish yellow strips, this actually would fit in really nicely with any rig, and I think it looks great. It obviously will add rigidity. It will help just give a bit more space to dissipate the heat from the back of the card as well. So I actually think it's a nice touch. It looks really good. Yeah. So instead we'll talk straight about performance, because performance for this Vega 64, the Nitro Plus edition, is actually quite surprisingly a decent bit faster than Vega 64 reference at 1080p and 1440p. It was about 6 to 7 frames per second, sometimes more, across our range of games at 1080p, and about 4 to 5 at 1440p. So that's a decent gain, and the actual gain comes from the actual cooling solution, because both cards actually ship with the same boost clock. It's their AMD does it a bit differently, where they say the boost clock is actually the maximum frequency achieved, and for this card and the Nitro, for this card, which is the Nitro Plus and Vega 64 reference, that's a figure of 1630 megahertz. However, reference Vega 64 would, in our original testing, we found that actually would peak at just over 1600, and then it would come down to between 1400 and 1500 megahertz. Whereas this card I found stabilized at around 1570 megahertz, which is up to 170 megahertz faster without any overclocking. So that's pretty impressive, and that explains the performance gains over Vega 64. Compared to GTX 1080, however, it's still a bit behind. I did notice in Deus Ex Mankind Divided, this Vega 64 actually did edge ahead of the GTX 1080, but that was that only happened in that game. For the other four on our test suite, it was actually still behind the 1080, although the margin did get a fair bit closer. So we're getting, well, it's getting to 1080 levels, still not quite there. Performance is solid. It's just the pricing where things get interesting, but we're going to touch on that later. Overclocking, I did struggle to get more out of the card actually, even with the power limit set to the max, which is plus 50, fan set to 100%, which was quite loud. I could only add an extra 5% frequency in Wattman, because it's not quite the same as with NVIDIA cards. In Wattman you have to add percent of performance or percent of frequency, so I got at plus 5% in Wattman, which in the real world equated to about plus 80 megahertz to the GPU core, which really didn't do much. It was maybe a couple of frames per second in the games that we tested, if that really. So definitely not worth the fan noise, because I had the fans at 100%, and also it was adding a fair amount of power. It was drawing a fair bit more power, and it's already drawing enough power, so overclocking, not sure it's worth it, because already out of the box it's giving you pretty good speeds because the cooling solution is effective. So wrapping up this video, aftermarket Vega 64 is here, but we don't know how much it's going to cost. If we look at other aftermarket cards which are up for pre-order from overclockers, they're around £650. That's the likes of MSI, Power Color, those guys. Anyone who's going to eventually do aftermarket Vega 64, they are quite expensive, and that is when you haven't even factored in the price of GTX 1080s at the minute. You can get those for as little as £480. So we still don't know. We haven't got firm pricing from Sapphire, but if it's got to be at least £600. If you think reference Vega 64 is still very thin on the ground, and you know that's starting around 550 now, so this is obviously going to be more than that. You think to yourself, would you pay more money for something that performs not as well? I think no is the obvious answer. There is maybe a very small niche if you maybe saved a couple £100 by buying a FreeSync monitor instead of a G-Sync one, and you want that tearing reduction technology, then there is a possibility that Vega 64 will appeal to you, especially if you're playing at 1080p or 1440p. However, I still think for most people, you'd buy a 1080, wouldn't you? It's more efficient, it's faster, and it's cheaper. Why wouldn't you? So This is undoubtedly, the Nitro Plus is undoubtedly a much better Vega 64 card than reference. However, we really need to see pricing come down. It's just not worth it. It's not worthwhile. So I'm Dominic for Kit Guru. This is the Nitro Plus Vega 64 from Sapphire. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up, hit subscribe if you haven't already. You can also leave us a comment down below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Is Vega 64 worth it yet? Or would everyone just go with a GTX 1080 Ti? So we will see you in the next video.